So, yeah, we're going to go back to the moldboard plow. So this is a primary tillage implement, and again, it flips the soil over. So there's adjustable things on this. The tractor has arms that go up and down. You can adjust them. There's a top length that you can adjust, and the plow itself has adjustments. We want it so that this line right here is level at the depth that we're plowing, which is usually about like that deep. So you don't want the plow like sitting like this or like this. You know, it takes a little while to just figure out how to set these plows so that they plow correctly. So we want to turn the sod over about 3/4 of the way up. We want it to be upright. We don't want to flip it all the way over. Yeah. And so this is another a picture of that shearing. So this is the soil before it's plowed. And just picture a pin through it. But then you can see where as it gets turned, this doesn't get moved quite as much as the top. And that's where it shifts it. And so every time that it's shifting this, that's bringing in air. And so it's cracking it all these different ways. Yeah, so bending the pages of the corner of a book illustrates, so like I was trying to show with the notebook. It's easier with like a paperback book. But as you bend it, every one of those layers shifts just like those pages of a book. And that really helps get air into the soil, yeah. So we only use the moldboard plow in the fall. So in late fall, the microbial, some of the activities dying down, it's getting towards, can start to be winter, and we only use it on sod. So this would be what I would, if I was going to take some grass, clover, sod, just some sod land, and I was going to try to have a garden there next year, I would probably put some compost down and plow it in the fall, and then leave it. So now we have these clods of earth that are plowed up. In the garden, the tool that mimics the moldboard plow would be a shovel. Yeah, so we would just use a shovel and flip the ground over. But then we do one of these things that I always say is one of the hardest things for a gardener to do. And the hardest thing for a gardener to do is to do nothing. Yeah, so you have to leave it alone. So you just flip it up, leave it whole. Well, what happens then is this clump of earth gets wet in the fall when it rains, and over the winter, it's full of water. Well, then when the temperature goes below 32 degrees, the water in that clod freezes. And water, when it freezes, expands. And it poofs out. And this water freezing in a clod of soil is the best way to till. It's nature's way of tilling. And it thoroughly pulverizes the soil and gets all this air into it simply by freezing and thawing over the winter. By far the most, then I have this saying, the sod that's a no-till system. Yeah, and then we till it, and then we stand back and don't till it and let nature do some work on it. Yeah. And then by far the most common plow we use is a chisel plow. And this is a chisel plow. And it has shanks on it. It's got a shoe that's really curved. It's about this big, and it's very pointed. It's actually pointed on both ends, so that after a year of tilling, the one end gets dulled, you can take it off and flip it over. Pretty slick. Yeah. It has springs on it that go back and forth this way. And those springs, as the tractor is going that way, pulling this through the field, then the tines go back and the springs stretch out, and then the springs tense and the tines move forward. So it's not going through the soil just like this. It's actually going like this. And it can go down 18 inches and it cracks the soil laterally as it's going. Yeah, so this is a tool that we used mostly. I used this tool in the spring. If it was a plowed sod, then I would go over it down the row, and then I would wait a few, let that settle, and then go crossways. When we grow a cover crop, I'll mow it a couple of times, and then I'll take this chisel plow through the field, and after about 20 feet, it might clog up with a bunch of rye and clover. So then I have to lift it up, pull forward, get everything to drop off, go backwards, get everything to drop off, pull forward, drop it back down, back up a little bit so that I get to where I unplowed land underneath where all the trash is, and then go forward. This is extremely frustrating, especially if you're doing a big field. But then just think about all of that organic matter that you're leaving on the surface of the soil. So one of the things that's advantage of this implement is it doesn't bury anything. It's just pulling right through the field, and it leaves the soil's layers intact. It's not inverting it like that other plow is. The other plow kind of flipping things up. So these plows became real popular after Ed Faulkner's book Plowman's Folly came out in 1947, which was a book about one of the first no-till books. He was like, we shouldn't be inverting these soil layers. There's life and different kinds of life in each of these soil layers. And so the more we can do to preserve that life, the better. So this is a plow that's used to help preserve the life of the soil. Yeah. So now we're going to talk about speed. So Christina makes these slides for me, and I don't even know what's going to come up yet. So she tries to be humorous sometimes. So I plow very slowly. Yeah, so this is something that, again, all these things are things that I learned the hard way. I plowed too fast. I used the wrong kind of implements. I went over the soil way too much and really messed up my soil structure. I've done everything you can imagine. So about 30 years ago, I met a guy from Eastern Europe, and he told me this, and it really stuck with me. He says, you plow like you're turning over a sleeping baby. That's like this. And so we want to plow like our soils are alive. Organic farmers will talk about how our soils are alive and everything. Well, we need to really treat it that way. So by going slow, we disturb it a whole lot less than by going fast. This guy over here was just zipping back and forth across that land over and over and over again. So that's not the way we plow. We plow really slow. It might take me hours to plow an acre. And I just am easing through it, just trying to just barely plow it, and you don't want to, overwork the soil. And so I think that the going slow is really, really important. I put the tractor in, a low gear that I can still rev it up and still have the power, of 520 RPMs, PTO, but where it's just kind of easing along. And a lot of these tractors now have those creeper gears and things like this. The BSC have a real slow, low gear that you can just kind of creep along. Yeah. So you'll notice that's very helpful to just take your time with it. Yeah. So depth is another consideration. So this is some soil on our farm where we have some topsoil, and then the soil starts getting a little bit lighter. And this is where we want to plow. And so particularly if we're moldboard plowing, we don't want to bring up a bunch of this subsoil to the top because it's infertile and it has lots of minerals in it, but they just haven't been worked upon by the life because there hasn't been enough air down here. And so we want to leave it there, but I don't mind. I like to drag the chisel plow so that it goes through it, because the chisel plow then isn't lifting it up and bringing it to the surface. So I'm plowing the whole time I'm plowing, I have my hand on the lift of the tractor so that I can, and as soon as I see some yellow stuff or some really moist, cloddy stuff coming up, I just pull this up so it's not going so deep. Because I don't want to make clods and all that stuff. So you can plow deeper in the drier weather than you can when it's damp. So I remember my dad just going into the field before he plowed, and he'd just pick up some soil and he would squeeze it and then drop it. And if it shatters, he would plow, but if it stayed into a ball, then he wouldn't plow. It would be too wet to plow. And so learning the proper moisture content to plow is really important. And you can really mess up your soil by plowing too wet. Yeah. And so, just have to, and that's why it's really nice to do some fall tillage. Yeah.
Is that because of a hard pan?
What?
If plowing too wet, would that just like kind of cause a hard pan?
It can cause a hard pan, but also it makes bricks. You'll have a bunch of clods. Yeah. Right. So you want the soil to shatter and to go like this, not to just like. Yeah. Oh my God. I can't make heads or tails of that. Where'd she find that picture? Well, there's a lot of things you can adjust on a plow. I think that's the point of this picture. Anyway, yeah, so yeah, here's a picture of the plow. And yeah, so you just set it so that it's level. That's what this picture is trying to say. Yeah. So again, I'm going to say don't plow when it's wet. The ground will be like, in a forms a ball. Just get out of the garden. So if I want to plant a garden in the spring, early, and that would be on our farm, it would be for potatoes, onions, peas, lettuce, carrots, beets, the early crops. Then I want to compost it in the fall, run the chisel through it, leave it rough plowed over winter. The freezing and thawing will help bust it up. And by being rough plowed like this, it'll drain quicker in the spring and it'll warm up faster because it has that air in it than if it was real flat and had a cover crop on it. This is a mistake I made for many years. I would plant a nice wheat, rye, vetch, pea, something cover crop on my land that I wanted to plow in March. And it didn't do me any good. Those things all they were doing is just keeping ground flat and moist and not letting it dry out. Yeah. So bare ground is a sin, and farming is a sin, and tillage is a sin. And so this is just part of the deal. You have to do it sometimes. Yeah, so yeah. Another factor to consider is time. And so it may not seem like it, but I think as gardeners and farmers, we want to breathe deeply and realize that we have all the time in the world. It's not this thing to be in a hurry about. Everything's going to be okay. We'll just chill out. And so, we grow a lot of these cover crops. And I'm probably bush hogging something, I don't know what it is. But we grow in the fall, we'll plant purple hairy vetch or Austrian peas for the legume, and we'll grow it with a grain crop like rye or wheat, or we might have crimson clover. So these are things that'll be in the field in the spring, and they'll be, this tall, and they'll be getting taller and taller. So to avoid them getting real tall, sometimes I'll bush hog the field, but I'll leave the bush hog up kind of high, and that keeps the rye and wheat in a vegetative growth rather than sending up that grain. Yeah. And so, but then eventually it's time to mow it and get the ground ready to plant. So I'll bush hog it again real slow with the bush hog revved up at 540 PTO RPM, and that's spinning around real fast and chops it up. But I might have to go over the field a couple of times if it's a real thick cover crop, because I want to get this stuff chopped up pretty good. And then I drag that chisel plow over the field one time, the length of the field. And then I do this thing that's really hard to do. I do nothing. So one of the problems that I've made early on in my farming was I would take some ground and I would go over it a whole bunch of times to try to get it ready to plant. And that excess of tillage really screwed up my soil structure. Yeah. So I've learned to just, so let's picture again these, the soil food web and these microbes. These microbes are growing on our plant roots, and they're different microbes for different plants. So you all understand this? So now we have, say we have crimson clover in a field. So it was planted in the fall, growing during the winter time, and then in April it's, you know, this tall, it's blooming, it's beautiful, like you saw the picture with the red flowers, that was crimson clover. Okay, so underneath the soil, on the roots of the crimson clover, are all these microbes that are living off of crimson clover root exudates. They're the crimson clover microbe gang. They're having a blast. And they're just getting all this food and all this, making babies and just doing all this fun stuff. And then I mow it. Holy moly. All of a sudden there's no root exudates going down there. These microbes start starving. They quit having babies. The babies start dying. It's pretty rough. Then I run the chisel plow through it. And they go like, holy moly, this is terrible. And so then I leave. And the field just looks like crimson clover stubble with just a couple of trenches in it. It doesn't look like it's really plowed very well. So by doing nothing, though, the miraculous thing happens. There's all these other soil microbes. It's getting warmer outside. They're going like this. Oh my goodness gracious, there's some elbow room. They start propagating. They're the summer-loving microbes, the ones that grow on the summer crops. And they haven't had a chance to do anything because the microbial population has been all about these crimson clover ones. So they start this huge underground battle over who's going to populate the microbe population in the soils. And the next time, after maybe 3 or 4 days or a week, I'll go over this field, and this time I might crisscross it from the first way I went with the chisel plow. And what happens is that everything busts up because these microbes that were holding the soil to the crimson clover plants have given up the ghost. And so I'm using the microbes to help me with my tillage. Does that make sense to you all? Yeah, so the microbe populations then shift, and by the third pass, it's just, it breaks up just fine, and it really works well, yeah.
Did you say you left the crimson clover, you never mowed it?
I did mow it, yeah.
You did?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, try to mow it pretty close too, yeah. Yeah, because that stops the root exudates from going in, which are feeding the soil microbes that I don't really want at this point. Mind you, I'm glad I had them all winter long. They've helped get nitrogen in the soil. They've done wonderful things for the soil. But in farming, if you have something and you want to grow something else, you have to figure out a way to move it from one crop to the next crop. That's what we're talking about here, primary tillage. Yeah. So this is what it looks like after I've gone over the field. It looks rough. And that's okay. I don't want to make a fine seed bed all at once. I want to make it over a time period of a few weeks. We're talking about time. So, I'm talking about this soil food web and the spaces in between the soil food web. And so the last time, oh, this is me doing nothing. This is supposed to be humorous. Yeah, so now I'm doing nothing. This is when you go play your guitar or do some artwork or something else. Yeah, there's other things to do on the farm besides plowing. Yeah. Oh, here's a soil food web. You all familiar with this concept of the soil food web? This has been around for quite a while. The idea being that the primary things are the bacteria and the fungi, and then they feed these other things, which then become food for other things, which become food for other things, and then it all just, just works in this kind of cyclical manner so that there's a lot of life in the soil. So, so when you see a groundhog in your garden and you start chasing it with a rake, like Elmer Fudd, you have to be happy that you have enough life in your field to support higher mammals. That's a good sign. Yeah.